Hey everybody, welcome back to another installment of the Manilow Method. I'm Logan Allen, that is Barry Harris. Thank you for joining us here today. Unfortunately, this is going to be not as jovial of an episode as we usually do. Unfortunately, recently, the passing of Clive Davis has been a conversation topic in the Manilow community. We wanted to come on and give our thoughts on the impact that Clive had on not only Manilow's career, but on so many other massive careers. Whitney Houston is obviously one of the big names that comes to mind when you think of Clive Davis. For those of you who don't know, Clive Davis was one of the first major people in the music industry to see the potential in Barry Manilow. And famously, Clive Davis was the one who picked the song Brandy for Manilow to sing. Brandy was an upbeat, rockin' song. Manilow recorded it. Clive came in and said, "Oh, well, that's not good." And Manilow sat at the piano and slowed it down. And Clive was like, "You better do that. Yes, that." So they changed the title from Brandy to Mandy because of the famous song Brandy that was popular at the time. They changed it to Mandy, and that is the reason why Barry Manilow has a career. That song, and it is thanks to Clive Davis. So there were many songs throughout Manilow's career that Clive Davis picked that went on to be hit singles, including Manilow's most recent top 10 hit, Once Before I Go. That was a suggestion from Clive Davis. Barry, it's very complex, Clive Davis's involvement in Manilow's career. There have been different dynamics over the years. Kind of walk us through the timeline of Clive's involvement.
Yeah, so Clive got involved after the first album was released. Barry Manilow had a contract with Bell Records, who released his first album. And then Clive Davis, at that moment, was the president and the head of Columbia Records, probably one of the biggest record labels in North America. And through a series of events, he was unceremoniously removed from his position and was left out in the cold. But Clive was one who was going to fight back, and he decided he was going to start his own record label. And his advisors eventually told him that it would be more cost-effective to buy out an existing label and all of their distribution networks rather than establish your own distribution networks, which would have been incredibly arduous. So he settled on Bell Records and bought out Bell Records for the purpose of just simply basically starting his own label from scratch. So his first duty was to essentially go through the assets of Bell Records, and Clive pretty much purged every artist off of the roster except for 3 artists: the Bay City Rollers, Melissa Manchester, and Barry Manilow. He listened to Manilow's first record, and he went and attended a Barry Manilow concert. This was when Barry Manilow opened for Dionne Warwick. Clive came to watch that performance in 1974. And when Clive came backstage to meet Barry Manilow, he shook his head and said, "Welcome to Arista." And so Barry Manilow was spared the purge of Bell Records artists from the label. And you could see the process of Bell Records becoming Arista, because the very early pressings of the Barry Manilow 2 album and Mandy had the Bell Records label, but very quickly the subsequent pressings and pretty much the massive amount of pressings that were done in response to the demand had the Arista label on it. And so Manilow benefited from a unique situation where Clive had a lot to prove, but Clive would not have been able to pull off the comeback of the century if it was not for the right song. Clive knew that he needed the right song, and Mandy by Barry Manilow just so happened to be that song. Now, without Clive, I think that Manilow would have went on to a great career as an arranger, as a producer. I think Manilow would have had his names on albums, but they would just be composed by, arranged by Barry Manilow. He was never going to be the artist, but it took Clive to see more potential in Manilow than Manilow saw himself. because Clive saw that Manilow was a preeminent interpreter of the American song. And that's potential that I don't think Manilow ever thought of himself having. But Clive saw this and knew that with Manilow's skills as an arranger and as a producer and even skills as a singer could really affect people who listened to his music. So we're so grateful that Clive was able to see something in Manilow that, was incredibly special, and he brought it out for the world to see. And through the years, they've had a unique dynamic. Clive has always been there to guide Barry through, making these albums, whether it's selecting the right songs when it's an original album. Clive would get the very best publishers and writers to come up with great candidates for Manilow to record on his original albums. And then when it came time for other projects like covers albums, such as the greatest songs of the 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, Clive was there to help guide the song selection. And so, there's a lot more to talk about when it comes to Clive Davis, and we'll save those for the album discussions when we approach them. But in the albums we've taped so far, we always make a point to really dig into the Clive and Barry collaboration, what that dynamic was for any particular record. They were all different in all the different eras, and again, the nuances, we'll cover them. You can count on us to cover them when we get to those individual albums. But it's really, the last thing to close with is what a run. 50 years Clive and Barry working together, from Mandy all the way to Once Before I Go. They've worked together in unique ways, and I think it has allowed Manilow's talents to soar and to be shared with all of us. I don't think you and I, Logan, would be here if it was not for Clive Davis and his championing of Manilow's music. We're all the more better for it. So we want to send our condolences to Clive Davis's family, his colleagues, and his friends. We know they will really miss Clive. We will miss Clive and all of his guidance in Manilow's career, but it's really something to be celebrated. What a life that Clive Davis lived.
Thank you for tuning in to this extra episode of the Manilow Method. We're in the middle of talking about the greatest songs of the 50s, which was a #1 album for Manilow, and it was Clive Davis's idea. So, we will see you very soon for the next installment of this fantastic show we have so much fun doing. I'm Logan Allen, that is Barry Harris, and we will see you soon on the Manilow Method.